The world was at peace. The grass grew and the trees blossomed. That is until the greed of mankind brought monsters alive for their own enjoyment. But playing God has its own consequences. These monsters became stronger, faster, and overthrew mankind. To save the world, they were thrown into their own dimensions. As time passed and legends were forgotten, evil began to spread again. With over 200 mods, new dimensions, and bosses to face, it is now our job to end this evil before it reaches the overworld. We have one life, one chance, one hope. Let's begin. I've started a brand new Patreon so I can take more time away from my job to work on videos. You'll get exclusive access to my SMP server and a private Discord to talk to other Patreons and myself. Link in description. Day 1. I spawned into the world and I was immediately greeted by my new subjects. They must have known I was about to become the king of this land because he wouldn't stop following me around. I then decided to start ransacking this man's house and collect his supplies. He would never know. I then began collecting this free cobblestone. It was just up here, no idea what it was doing, but I decided it would be great for my first pickaxes. I then noticed two adorable little children inside the village and I went up to greet them. I hope they survive and do well in this world. After collecting my cobblestone, I made sure to shut the doors to the house so no baddies could get in and the kids would be safe inside of the new house. Upon leaving the village, my subject wanted to follow me, but I said, "No, kind sir, you stay there. You guard your village, and I will go and take over the kingdom and I'll come back for you and make sure you're still alive, maybe." Whilst adventuring through the forest, I met a phantom, and I proceeded to go the opposite direction post-hastily. Whilst adventuring, I noticed a tree that was on fire, and since I'm against pollution, I immediately ran up to it and put the fire out. All the good I'm doing in this world. Is that a bee with a piece of TNT strapped to it? What is happening? I knew nightfall would be dangerous, and I needed food if I wanted to survive, so I immediately slaughtered these innocent pigs and took all of their meat. I then found some more of my subjects, and I began to do what any king would do. You should subscribe and turn notifications on just like I'm hitting this bell to see even more 100 days content. Whilst borrowing supplies for them, I found an iron chestplate, some gold, a saddle, and some apples, and a treasure map inside of a chest. I then used a brand new technique to kill the iron golem that's never been used before. I'm such a pioneer of new techniques, just look at my YouTube. Next day, I abandoned the village, but I left a waypoint there in case I wanted to come back later. I then ventured into the mines. I knew if I wanted to start facing bosses soon and building technology that would rival that of modern-day cities, I needed to get some resources and I needed to get them quickly. While I was in the mines, I noticed a certain copper ore from the Create mod. If you've never played with the Create mod before, then you better get ready because we're going to make some absolutely insane designs, presuming we actually survive these next 100 days. My vision for this world was simple. Because the mods were so expansive when we could go in any direction we wanted, I wanted to be the most powerful Minecraft being that was ever presented in any world ever. And I was going to attempt to accomplish this using technology and by defeating every single boss and every single mod. We were absolutely going to obliterate this world, and we could carry it through into many 100 days past this, assuming we survive. While in the mines, I encountered these wolf-like creatures that can turn into bats, which wouldn't be so much of a problem. I mean, I had iron armor, I was doing fine. Except I couldn't hit them. No, legit, every time I tried to hit them, it would just be like I was hitting the air. So I made my escape out of the tunnel before they killed me. I had no idea how to kill these things, and I had to figure it out quickly if I wanted to go spelunking again. I started off the next day by slaughtering some innocent cows. I needed their leather so I could start making some backpacks so I could begin adventuring and seeing what this world had to offer. Out in the wild, I spotted a half-man, half-animal-like object, and then he charged at me with goat antlers and everything. I have no idea what's going on, but I attacked him, and I was able to defeat him. What the heck is that thing? Swim, 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 swim. I then found another banana. I would not be eating this. Whilst exploring, I found these two epic-looking mountains and a tiny village beneath it, and I figured this would be the perfect place to make a home base. There was just one problem. It happened to be inhabited already. I then stole this man's bed to sleep for the night. The next day, I started working on a solution for the current inhabitants. You see, if I was going to be their king, I probably shouldn't slaughter them all, so I should find a new home for them. I was able to persuade the local civilian to get in my land boat, and then we started making our way towards his new house. I deposited him in his new home and said farewell. I also gave him a stick to play with and made sure there were some torches down there so that no zombies would spawn. After making sure the only inhabitant of the village, not sure where the rest went, was safely put away, I decided to start terraforming the land so it would fit my new house. I wanted to go adventuring soon and see what dungeons and lairs and bosses lay within this world. But I wanted a home base first. I wanted a house where I could store all of my goodies and come back to when nighttime came about. My subject from the first village found his way all the way over to here. What a loyal man, so I decided to reward his loyalty by bringing him to the other villager. I then ran into a slight problem. I had lost the hole that I had originally put the villager in, so I had to go and find it. I tried to explain to my new subject that he was to get in the boat, not spin atop of the boat. But he just had his own way about it and would not listen to me. But eventually, he climbed into the boat, and we began rowing over to his new companion. Look how cute they look together. They even got in the same boat. I then spent the next few days finishing up my terraforming and building my first house. Now, eventually, I wanted a way more epic house. I was going to build it into the mountainside, carve out a section, have an outlay that came out with a glass patio, make it absolutely brilliant. But for the time being, as we were limited on resources and I wanted to get to exploring the world, I figured this would just work out fine. At the end of day 8, I finished up the house. You actually have no idea how proud I am of myself. I'm an awful builder, so building something like this was truly a feat of excellence. When I was about to go to bed, I witnessed 2 dogs chasing a skeleton around. It's quite funny because I guess they wanted his bones. I helped them out by smacking the skeleton with my sword, and they were able to take him down. I then fed the skeleton bones to the doggos. Good boys. While bringing my items in to begin sorting them into chests, I heard a noise outside and I went to inspect it. You might ask why I didn't put walls around my house. Well, that's because I want the mobs to come in. I want them to feel my blade. And just like that, Goatman walked in and killed one of the dogs, and I avenged them by killing him back and his mutated wolfies. This was my land now, and anybody who trespassed on it would feel the wrath of my arsenal. I decided I wanted a break from terraforming and building my house. I had found this map that said it would lead me to a jungle pyramid, and I wanted the loot, so I decided to follow it and adventure towards it. I then was faced with an ocean in front of me, but never fear, I crafted a little paddle boat and I went on my way. Whilst adventuring through the ocean, I encountered 2 little dolphins that decided to safeguard me. They knew I was the king of this new empire. Nighttime had fell upon us right as we approached the jungle pyramid, and I needed to sleep somewhere, so I decided to murder these sheep and make a bed. As the next day began, I had a slight problem. Once I scaled the mountain with my mountain goat techniques, I encountered a wraith. I have no idea what this thing is, but I didn't want it alive, so I managed to kill it after it infected me. Then I found the jungle... It's a jungle temple. Why did they call it a jungle pyramid? This is definitely a jungle temple. Well, let's hope there's good loot in it. Through my expert movement techniques that I've learned, I was able to sidetrack the traps. I then met a witch hunter that decided to make his home in the basement of this temple. I also slaughtered him. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing, and I didn't like his shifty eyes. The rewards I got for traversing that land in this temple were 4 iron ingots, and 6 bones, and a piece of bamboo. But they were not going to trick me, because I knew there was a secret chest in here, and I began working out the code by spamming the same lever again and again. Eventually it didn't work, and I decided to break through the wall and find the chest myself. And I did, and it had some diamonds in it. While on my way home, I encountered this village I had never seen before, so I decided to investigate it and see what loot it had for me. I was tearing down bookshelves inside of a house when I encountered this chest. Haha, you thought you could hide it from me? So I opened it and I found some amazing loot. This would be great starter stuff. I then climbed atop this tower, and I looked out at the horizon and I said, wow, that's a big horizon. I started out the next day by leaving the village, and I made sure to leave them with my signature mark. However, upon activating the bell, an explosion happened, and a Wilden Stalker attacked me. I still have no idea how to do damage to this thing, and after I realized that, I sprinted away for the ocean for my only saving grace. The mobs in the distance looking at me as I sailed away, I could only think, this is my kingdom, and I will be back. As soon as I got home, I realized that if I wanted to start getting into nuclear tech and some amazing things that this mod pack has, I needed to go mining. So I started off by crafting a backpack, as I would need a lot of resources whilst in the mines. While I was preparing, this random man with 2 llamas suddenly appeared. Not sure what he was doing, but he was trying to invade my house, so I pushed him away. Before heading off into the mines, I thought it would be a good idea to get a farm going, as I seem to always struggle with food in these mod packs. Whilst doing some crafting, the traveler had the audacity to push me around. How dare he in my own house? I then headed into the mines and began my excursion. I had no idea what awaited me down here past the ores. I didn't know what mobs had spawned or what dungeons there were to raid, but I thought I was ready. The next day I was still in the mines. Whilst exploring, I encountered some skeletons with another one of those wolfmen. Now I knew I couldn't kill him, but apparently the skeletons could, so I waited for them to shoot him, and then once they were done, I charged in for the cleanup. I found some more treasure maps, but after the first one I was kind of scarred from it, so I decided I would not be pursuing it for now. The next day I found my first diamond ore, PogChamp, but there was only 2 of them. I then continued mining and looting for the rest of the day. The next day my inventory and backpack were getting quite full, so I knew it was time to head up to the surface and begin my empire. I wanted every single resource in the game automated up the wazoo, and I wanted it tomorrow, but it might take a few more days than that. I started out the next day by collecting some gravel and sand. I wanted to get a smeltery going so I could begin duplicating my ores and begin my industry. I then crafted some grout using sand, clay, and gravel. Grout can be smelted into seared bricks, which are used for the multi-block structure that you can then create a smeltery out of. I headed back into the cave so I could grab some lava. Lava is used for fuel for the Tinker's smeltery. I think this man was struggling with his llama a little bit, because somehow a rope was going through a wall and a llama was inside of my house. So I went around to check up what was going on with him. When I right-clicked on him to see what he had to trade, he had a crazy overpowered axe that he wanted to give me. Very kind of him. But in return, he wanted 45 emeralds, and that's a lot of emeralds. I figured that the easiest way to get emeralds would be to turn a villager into a Fletcher. But I needed a bunch of sticks as that was required to trade with him. So I went around and I began chopping down trees. I then pillared up to the villager that was trapped aside the mountain and he tried to escape. But nonetheless, I put my fletching table down, but he didn't change into a Fletcher. I had heard that if there are other trades around, he might be looking for those, so I went around their village and I looked for any other trade stations and I destroyed them. But he still wasn't turning into a Fletcher, and I had no idea why. I then used my oversized cranium and realized that the fletching table was actually from a mod. You see, the mod changed the item ID for it, which in turn does not allow the villager to see it as a normal fletching table. I then assessed that the next best villager for me to trade with was going to be a librarian, but to trade with him I was going to need a lot of sugarcane. So I expanded my sugarcane farm and I waited for it to grow. Meanwhile, I worked more on my smeltery and started gathering up the necessary blocks that would turn it into a multi-block structure. Since this is 1.16, it changed some of how Tinker's smeltery works, and it took me a while to figure it out. The next day I made a new block called the Melter. This is a new block added into Tinker's for 1.16, and apparently it can melt down ores as its own entity. It's not a multi-block structure, and it's required to make the smeltery controller, because the smeltery controller requires a heater that is poured on by molten copper. But to get molten copper, you need a smeltery, unless you have a melter, because apparently a melter can smelt down ores. That made sense. I spent the rest of the day melting down my ores and preparing for what was going to come next. I wanted to fast-track technology. I wanted to get into it as quickly as possible so I could start making some OP armor and start facing off against some of the titans of bosses that are held within this mod pack. But the bosses are very difficult, and I'm going to need some advanced armor to be able to take them on. So to do that, we need to get into technology quickly. Next day, I realized that if I wanted to make some more of the machines, I was going to need some diamonds. But I had no quick access to get them, but then I remembered I had a treasure map. So I followed it to the source, as usually there are diamonds inside of this treasure. Finally, after some digging, I was able to find the long-lost treasure, and there were no diamonds inside. Quite disappointing. I wanted to automate the mining process as soon as possible, but to do that, I was going to need some obsidian. So I ran into the mines to start collecting it with my new diamond pickaxe. Whilst mining for obsidian, I found some diamonds. It was perfect, because there were even more than I needed. By the time I returned to my house, it was nightfall, so I sorted out my items, and I went to sleep to prepare for the next day. This was going to be a huge day. Whilst attempting to sleep, I noticed some noises outside, and I went to investigate. And I found this large, puffer-like fish man. I didn't know if he was hostile, I would have just left him alone, but as I approached him, he began to zap me. So I decided he was not welcome inside of my lands, and I attempted to attack him. But he did a lot of damage to me, but over time, I was able to lower his defenses, and I took him out. I started out the next day by looking at the crafting recipes for the Voyager Miners. These will allow us to mine a crazy amount of ores at the expense of power, but they had tweaked the crafting recipes since the last time I had used them, and they required a lot of ender pearls. So I assessed where I could get ender pearls from, and I realized, oh, it's 1.16. The Nether has ender pearls now, so I decided I would venture off. And went and collected some wheat before I headed into the depths of the Nether. As I built the Nether portal, I could only wonder, what evils lay within the Nether in this mod pack? Well, without a second thought, I decided to jump right in. My plan was to trade with piglins, as they trade ender pearls for gold, but then I realized I had no gold, so I had to go back to the overworld and get some. After finding some of the local civilians to trade with, I figured the best solution would be to put them in a hole, and then throw my gold to them and see what they would give me. After a while of trading, I came back to see what loot they had for me. Although there was some cool stuff in there, including some boots with soul speed 3, they hadn't given me one solid ender pearl, which was a huge upsetting feat, and I didn't know what to do. Since all of the tech miners required quartz, I figured I would continue venturing in the nether and begin collecting some quartz. Spent the next couple of days mining out the quartz and just investigating the nether. I found this bastion-like area, but it wasn't a normal bastion. It had some chests in it with some decent loot, nothing too crazy. I wasn't quite sure what mod generated this structure, but it definitely was not normal vanilla Minecraft. I don't think. I also discovered that you can mine cobalt with a diamond pickaxe while you're in the nether, which is perfect because cobalt is the next tier up of tools that I want to make. The next day I started out by mining some sugarcane. I was going to start trading with a villager some paper for some emeralds, so I could then in turn trade emeralds for ender pearls. And from those ender pearls, we would search out and find the end portal, and we would take down the ender dragon. I also noticed some cows while I was out, so I decided to bring them home and put them in a cute little pit so they could breed together and create more cows to provide me for food for later. Then began preparing as much leather as I could find to make the final bookshelves I would need to make a max level enchanting area. It would be a lot easier if I had a looting 3 sword when I went to the end, so I could begin robbing the endermen of all their pearls. And then my enchant area was finally prepared, and I began to enchant my items, only to realize that it barely took any experience from me, but it took a lot of lapis. So even though I had a crazy amount of levels still, I used up my lapis pretty quickly, and I didn't get any of the enchants that I wanted. As nightfall came, I decided to go out and try and kill some endermen to get some pearls, only to discover that they only drop fragments, and it takes 4 fragments to make 1 ender pearl. This was way too inefficient, and I needed to figure out a better way, so I decided to turn to the villagers. While on my way home, I noticed a new village that I'd never seen before, so I went to check it out. There were some chests inside of the huts, and some of them had emeralds in it, which was going to make my trading a lot easier for the villagers to come to get some ender pearls. When I arrived home, I went to my pit, and I turned my villager into a cleric, which will eventually trade me ender pearls. All I need to do is find a good way to get emeralds, but since I planted all that sugarcane, that wouldn't be too difficult. As soon as I unlocked ender pearls and was able to go to the end, I knew my potential was limitless, and this world would be mine. Eventually, after some trading, the villager was able to give me 1 ender pearl for 4 emeralds, which is a complete ripoff, but would suffice for now. I then went and grabbed all of the sugarcane I had collected, went to the hill where my villager still was, placed a lectern down, and he turned into a librarian. Librarians will give you emeralds for paper. This is why I had been having all this sugarcane all along. I was able to accumulate 5 ender pearls from them, and the 1 that I had had from the night searching. I crafted them into Eyes of Ender, and I began to search for the portal that would lead me to the dragon. The stronghold was only about 300 blocks from my house. I've never had one so close. It was amazing. So I dug straight down, and I began to look for the portal. When I had found the portal, I realized I did not have enough Eyes of Ender, so I went to the library and began destroying the bookshelves. I could trade these books to the villager for even more emeralds to get a couple more Eyes of Ender. After accumulating the emeralds, I traded them for some more Eyes of Ender, which was perfect. I had just enough now to make it to the end. I then hopped back into the end, and I began the fight with the Ender Dragon. I knew I wanted to use beds because I didn't have a lot of arrows. In fact, I barely had enough just to take down the crystals. While I was taking down one of the crystals, I was knocked off, and I barely survived by landing in the corner of a water block. It was absolutely insane. I then began the time-old strategy of using beds to blow him up, which caused a lot of damage to me, which caused me to eat a lot of food, which at the time I didn't think was a big deal. Until I ran out of 2 things, beds and food. And then I started to worry, because I started to realize there was no way out. And the dragon, he was deciding not to perch, and I had no way to shoot him with my bow. I literally sat there for 2 days, waiting for him to do something. He wouldn't do anything. I started to realize as my hunger ticked down, that this might be the end of me, and I wouldn't even last a quarter of the series. How embarrassing. I noticed that a man with 2 rats had spawned next to me, and it gave me the idea that maybe something spawns on this island that's not normal. Maybe there's a food or just something that can get me by long enough to kill the dragon. I had 1 shot. If the dragon shot me at all, or landed even near me and hit me, I'd be dead. But I had to take it. I had no other choice. So I began running around the island, looking for anything that might help me survive. And then I spotted it. A waystone. My saving grace. First thing I did when I arrived home was look for some arrows, and I was able to find 24 of them. And then I went to the villager to trade for some lapis. I wanted to put some sort of power on my bow to give me a better chance of taking the dragon down in case he didn't perch again. I made sure to grab ample food this time, just in case. But I had the waystone there now, so regardless I would be okay. Nearly immediately after getting back to the end, the dragon perched. Of course he did. And I began to furiously attack him with my sword, and I brought him down, and I eliminated him from the game. The objective here was not to kill the Ender Dragon, I just needed to remove him. The objective was to have an unlimited supply of Ender Pearls. And now that I had it at my fingertips, the world was going to be mine. I started out the next day by asking my cows to have some children, and they obliged. I then headed down into the mines, and I was immediately greeted with these friendly fellows, which I took care of. They left me a goodie chest, which I decided to take after. It had some good potions in it, nothing too crazy. I was really down here for lapis. I wanted to enchant his sword so I'd get looting on it, head back to the end, kill some endermen, and start my process towards technology. While questing for lapis, I found some diamonds, PogChamp, and then pretty soon after, I found some lapis as well. This was good enough, and I decided to head back up to the surface and begin enchanting. When I was back to the surface, I took my enchanted swords and I began smelting them back down to their iron ores. I figured, you know what, we may as well give it a shot. We'll throw this sword in, and we'll just see if we get looting 3. So I threw it in, and boom! Looting 3. That was my 19th sword. I then crafted an anvil. I wanted to combine my previous sword with my new looting 3 sword. This way I would have some pretty good sharpness, and I could take care of these endermen pretty quick. I knew as soon as I was able to obtain enough ender pearls, I could begin advancing in this mod pack and start adventuring and facing some of the bosses it had to offer. But ender pearls were the key to this new chamber. The next day I ventured into the end, and I was immediately attacked by every enderman within sight. So I booked it to my little house, and I began slaughtering them. Roll the time lapse. After collecting enough ender pearls, I headed back to the overworld, only to realize I had slept in the village the last time, and I was still 400 blocks away from my home. I started out the next day by crafting some diamond chests. I kept running out of storage, and before I was able to get a computer up and running, this would have to suffice. I then harvested my sugarcane and plotted how to get the villager off the mountain. I wanted to trade with him for some paper, for some emerald, as I was going to need them if I was going to make a void ore miner today. It was essential that I make a void ore miner, because then I would be getting unlimited resources, and I could begin a technological empire, and begin taking on the bosses. I collected some more resources from my tinker smeltery, and then slept the night. I started off the next day by doing some enchanting. I got a pickaxe with Fortune 3, and I headed down into the mines. I needed to collect some lapis if I wanted to make some of the advanced structure blocks environmental tech requires. I returned back to the surface and began smelting down some of the ores I had collected, and then went on to begin my crafting. I then began the long, tedious process of crafting all the parts required to make an ore miner. You see, it's not just one block, it's actually a multi-block structure, and in 1.16 they changed it a lot from the previous versions, so I had to relearn what I was doing. The next day, midway through crafting, I realized that I needed more obsidian, so I went down into the mines and I collected some more. I then realized to craft the actual brain of the void ore miner, I needed a diamond block, but I only had 5 diamonds, so I took to the mines and I began strip mining for some diamonds, crossing my fingers for some good luck. And within minutes, we found some. When I returned to the surface, I was able to craft the void ore miner itself. This is going to be overpowered. Next day, it was time to construct my void ore miner. So I took it outside, and I began to try and figure out how to assemble it. You used to just use an assembler, and you would right-click on the block, and it would then build the multi-block structure. But they removed that item entirely. Apparently, you're supposed to shift right-click on it. But I attempted that, and nothing happened. And then I tried building it upside down, and nothing happened. I also tried sideways, and nothing happened. I began doing some research, and I couldn't come up with why the heck it was not building itself. Apparently the man that built the instruction manual forgot to mention there was a button on the ore miner that you're supposed to click and then hit build me. I started off the next day with smelting some coal down to make some graphite. I then moved on to begin smelting some uranium inside of the smeltery. I can handle uranium without gloves, right? Stuff isn't dangerous. I then began working on some other ore production while I was waiting for my coals to smelt. I then went down into the mines to crash some obsidian into some redstone to make some flux. You see, to transmit the power from my reactor to my new ore miner, I would need a way to actually do it wirelessly, because I hate cables and they're all messy. And flux nodes are the perfect way to do that. But to craft flux nodes, you need some flux dust. I started off the next day with crafting a flux node and a flux plug. A flux plug will go on the reactor, and the flux node will go on any entity that needs power. And then, anywhere in the world you can wirelessly transmit that said power. It's absolutely amazing. I then began constructing the multi-block structure that would become a nuclear reactor. It had been updated a little bit since 1.12, but it was still mainly the same in 1.16. Simply surround a bunch of yellorium rods with some casing, add some outputs, a control box, and a power source, and then you're good to go. I then fired up the reactor for the first time, placed the flux plug on the energy output, and then I placed the flux node onto my void miner. And there we have it, my first ore. Of course it's an apatite ore. I started out the next day by enchanting some iron gear. I was preparing to go into a new dimension. I had never been in here before, and I had no idea what to expect. Like, literally, I had no idea. I'd done no research. I was just planning to go right in and see what it had for me. Nothing ever goes wrong when you do that, right? The portal itself is constructed out of stone bricks, and then requires a catalyst to activate it. It's built the exact same way as another portal. I lit it up, and I jumped right in. I had no idea what to expect, but I was ready. You see, the dimension is called the Undergarden, and when you think of a garden, you think of, wow, look at that beautiful rose over there. Well, think of it like this. Wow, there's a lot of poison everywhere. I decided it would be a great idea to pick up the goo that just poisoned me. I wanted to know what it was called, and I thought it looked kinda cool. Whilst exploring the terrain, I met my favorite mob ever, the Wilden Stalker. I found out why I did no damage to him the first time. He actually applies weakness to you, but since I had such a crazy good sword now, I was able to take him out. Whilst exploring, I found this tiny man that looked like he had no legs. I spent the next few days exploring the terrain. I knew there were some evil bosses and labyrinths inside of this world with some really cool loot, and I wanted to find some. You couldn't pay me $1 million to jump in that lake. Whilst looking for the labyrinth that held the riches of this world, I bumped into some creepy looking mods, and I just took in the atmosphere. You really get drawn into this world like no other dimension I've ever played in before. And the sounds and just the lighting, it really brings you into the game like you're actually there. And then after days of searching, I found my first structure. It could only be the labyrinth. And I was ready to plunge inside and see what fate had in store for me. Fate then gave me a horrible pickaxe. Things were going terrific. While searching through the caves, I found this horrendous looking mod and decided it would be best to backtrack and begin swinging. This man does way too much damage for what he is, and I don't like that he exists. Thankfully for me though, I think my grandmother with her walker could outpace this man. Eventually, after way too long of a time period, he fell to my blade, and I robbed him of all of his items. He dropped some weird shards that I didn't know what they did, but I'm sure they were epic. If you thought he was freaky though, just wait until we meet the boss. I've seen pictures of this thing, and it's still sending chills down my spine. I continued exploring the labyrinth for a few days, finding some chests, some mobs I did not want to encounter ever again in my life, and some cool items. I didn't know if these were that good yet, but I would figure I would grab all that I could, and then evaluate what was good later. After finishing the labyrinth, I made my way home. You see, that boss that I fought inside of the labyrinth with that giant robot-like thingy, he did half of my hearts in one hit. And if the boss, the ruler of this dimension, is stronger than he is, I probably need some better gear. So I went back home to prepare myself for the battle soon to come. Fighting these bosses with only iron armor and a diamond chestplate's not exactly a good idea, but I mean, when do we not do this? After all, good ideas are for peasants. When I finally found the biome that he spawns in, I killed one of those wolf-like men, and he dropped an ironclad netherite chestplate. Now you might say to yourself, oh, that looks cheated in. But if you'll notice the stats on it, it's actually impossible to exactly replicate this chestplate with the mods. I'm very upset I missed the clip, but I'm going to be using it anyway, because it looks absolutely epic. I then tracked him down, and my strategy commenced. I had 2 slowness arrows that I was going to slow him down with, and that would allow me to bow him from a distance, and when he got too close, I would take out my iron sword, and I would begin to smite him down. I thought for a moment he was going to kill me, but thankfully my adamantium carrot kept me safe, and I was able to get distance again and begin bowing him until finally I eliminated him and became the conqueror of this dimension, and I felt pretty good about it. I then returned to the overworld to continue my quest for technological superpowerness. That's not a word. When I arrived home, I ran into the time-old problem of storage. Diamond chests are for peasants, boys. I wanted the real storage, so I decided to start that day off by questing to go and get some slime balls, as they would be necessary for our future crafting. While I was harvesting the hemp so I could craft some string, I could only think about the absolutely insane mechanical designs we could come up with in this world. There's a mod called Create in here, and Create literally allows you to do anything you want. I am so excited to try some of these amazing concepts I have for machines. This is going to be absolutely insane. But first, we need a storage system. To close off the day, I ran back into the mines to mine for some redstone. I was going to need a lot of redstone if I was going to construct a new computer to hold all of my items. I started the next day by collecting some nether quartz and mining it up with my new Fortune 3 pickaxe. This would allow me to smelt it down into silicone, which can then be crafted into computer parts, which then I can craft into the ultimate storage system. The next day, I realized I was going to need a lot more iron if I was going to construct this computer right now, so I headed into the mines, grabbed some, smelted it down, and I began the crafting process of building my first computer. Computers are essential in this mod pack because they allow you to infinitely store items, as long as you have enough disk space available, and disk space is just attributed by the amount of resources you have. So now we have to start working on gaining immense amount of resources if we want a limitless computer. Then began the creation process of an overpowered 3x3 mining hammer. I knew if I wanted to start mining resources at an immense level and start getting into the mod Create to where I can make machines that have limitless possibilities, I needed to go mining first. My ore miner was not producing enough ores at this point to actually sustain the builds I wanted to do. I wanted to build a bunch of ore miners so they could start recurringly getting as many resources as I needed. But to do that, I needed one big mining trip. And it was time to take on that challenge. With the advanced plating I put onto my hammer, it was almost indestructible and allowed me to mine for many days and collect a crazy amount of resources. This is exactly what we needed to start this technological empire. Once I finished up my overworld mining trip, I knew I needed one trip to the nether to collect some nether quartz. Hopefully this would be the last time I would ever need to manually mine like a peasant. I started off the next day with crafting some spruce stairs. I was going to begin the transformation process of the mountain into a workplace for my first machines to go. To do that though, I was going to need to carve a pretty big hole in the side of it. I wanted to start my industry first because that was the most important part, and then later I would focus on the cosmetic and the more fun stuff. The room I was building needed to be very large because it needed to be able to run cables, multiple multi-block machines, and a lot of pulverizers and furnaces. This was going to be madness, and we were going to exploit everything about this mod pack. I started out the next day by crafting some pulverizers. I was about to go and craft some automatic furnaces when I was greeted by a few zombies. When I started to defeat them, I noticed more and more coming through the doorway. I had no idea where they were coming from, and I almost thought to ran for a second. But then I looked outside and saw there was none left, and I decided they would meet their end by my blade. I then crafted my automatic furnaces, and I was only lacking one thing: blaze rods. If I wanted to make more nodes for transferring power, I needed more blaze rods to make Eyes of Ender, so I headed back into the nether. I knew there was a little fortress thingy by my portal, so I headed over there, because I figured there were some spawners inside there, as Blaze had shot at me when I was running by before. Little did I know there was an actual end spawn inside of it. You can actually get to the end inside of this dungeon. It's actually really cool. It's almost like a stronghold, but it's inside of the nether. I've never seen anything like this before, and I really thought it was a neat concept. The next day, we got a lot done. We started out the day by grabbing some obsidian from in the mines. We then crafted a bunch of flux points. This would enable us to wirelessly transmit power to all of our pulverizers and furnaces. I then destroyed my iron chest and replaced it with an ender chest with 3 blue nodes. Ender chests allow you to change their color type. Based on their color type, you'll have a different identifier for what items are running through it. For instance, if you have 2 ender chests that are all blue, they'll meet up. But if you have 1 ender chest that is half blue, for instance, let's say the top is blue and the bottom is blue, then it will not meet up with any other ender chest except for the one that's exactly like it. This enables you to distribute items evenly, and we're going to use it for how we're going to import items into our computer. I then began to set up my ore processing plant. I was going to use pulverizers and furnaces for the first iteration. Essentially, the pulverizer would duplicate the ore, deposit the ore into the furnace would smelt the ore down into an ingot, and the ingot would get imported back into my ME system via the ender chests. I started out the next day by making sure all the right ores were whitelisted and being exported into the ender chest. This way they would process through the pulverizers and furnaces and then get re-imported back into the computer. To set up a more elaborate system, I needed more ender chests, but to get more ender chests, I needed more blaze rods, so I grabbed some wheat and then I headed back into the nether and began farming some blazes until I had enough rods to make enough chests so I could begin my true automation. I started off the next day by making sure the sorting systems on my machines worked properly. To do that, I needed to add a whitelist filter. A whitelist filter allows you to locate a certain item out of that said machine. This way, I can garbage anything that's a secondary product. For instance, when you smelt down iron, sometimes you get a byproduct of gravel. Gravel can't be smelted into a furnace and would eventually clog the system, so I need to export that via a whitelist into a void trash can. I then set up all the export filters from my main computer. Everything would get imported in here and then I would export to the correct machines from here. I like having a central processing unit for everything because it just makes everything a lot simpler. I started out the next day by heading back into the nether. I needed to accumulate some more blaze rods. I needed to automate this system very soon because I was going to need a lot of blaze rods, but for now, I figured one big farming trip would be enough, and I could get into the automation process of it a little bit later. The next day, I began preparing some farmland to start creating an epic automatic farm. But this was not going to be any ordinary automatic farm. We're going to be using the Create mod. In this mod, you can essentially do anything you want, and I was really excited to set it up and to see it in action. Once we're able to automate farmland, we'll be able to automate the spawning of mobs and collection of blaze rods. And once we're able to automate the collection of blaze rods, well, the world will be at our fingertips at that point. I spent the rest of the day working on the unique ores that the mod requires to build its machines. Once we were able to get a few of the machines going, we could then have an endless supply of everything that we needed. The next day I began the creation of my automatic farming machine. To get it going and to power it, all I was going to require is smoke. Smoke would then go through the fan would power some bearings, and the bearings would turn the entire fixture, which would then harvest the items. However, to accumulate the items, I was going to need a point to drop them off. To do that, I was going to attach a portable storage interface to the end of my farming machine, and then to the ground it would meet at. It would then deposit into an ender chest, and the ender chest would deposit into my computer. Easy as pie. I did somehow manage to make the farm go the opposite direction of what I intended, so I had to break everything, replace it, and so it could go the right way. Eventually, though, we had it working, and the automatic farm was complete. Although it was kind of small at the moment, but it was only to get the basic resources going, so we could expand it even bigger. Maybe we can even take the potato farming title. Day 69. The next day, I did a little bit more work on the farm. I realized that to plant hemp seeds to get a lot of string, I needed to actually break it 2 blocks down, otherwise it would harvest the hemp seeds when they're planted. So I made sure that worked okay because we were going to need a lot of string to expand my storage in my computer. Things were starting to pile up and I needed to expand the drives, otherwise we were going to overfill and we weren't be able to store anything. I then started construction on an underground farm. I was going to need a lot of wheat and carrots if I was going to begin spawning blazes. I needed to collect a lot of wheat and carrots if I was going to begin automatically spawning in blazes and endermen. You see, life essence is required to spawn in anything, and farming is the easiest way to get this essence. My storage systems were running quite full, but to craft new drives I was going to need a lot of glass, so I headed out to collect some sand. The next day I ventured back into the nether looking for some more cobalt, but I found this cool little dungeon thing and it had an enchanted golden apple in it. This would come in handy later, as we were going to a new dimension soon. A dimension with the hardest boss inside of this mod pack, and we had to be ready with everything we could get. The next day I began mining out all the materials that were under my house. Good thing gravity does not affect us, otherwise my house would have fallen apart. I really wanted to get a supercomputer going, but to do that I was going to need space. And this new basement was going to provide me all the space I needed to make the ultimate computer and sorting system. Whilst in my basement, I was joined by many friends that I then slaughtered. More and more poured in. I have no idea where these guys are coming from, but they keep invading my household. You know, this ain't too shabby for a guy that can't build. I began the next day by starting the tedious process of crafting a jetpack. I wanted to go exploring to see if I could kill some dragons, to see if I could get some dragon steel armor before I venture in to the last dimension with the hardest boss we've faced yet. I then built a Flux Controller. This would allow me to wirelessly charge my jetpack from any station that actually stores power, meaning I never have to charge the jetpack ever. This thing is amazing. However, since the last time I used it, the mod had been updated, and I had no idea how to actually use the jetpack. But after some tinkering, I figured it out, and I enabled it, and I was able to fly. I knew finding the dragons was going to be quite difficult, as I hadn't seen any yet, so searching for them was going to take quite a few days. So before I headed out, I wanted to make sure I had enough storage to collect the ores that were being processed. So I crafted some more drives, and I moved everything downstairs. In the future, when we're having tons of items imported into our computer, I want a lot of space for all the ender chests, and downstairs just has more room than upstairs. That makes sense. Before going on my hunt, I also wanted to automate a way for obsidian, as I was going to need a lot of it if I was going to create a lot of void ore miners. So, I simply pumped in cobblestone to a magma crucible, had it smelted down into lava, had the lava go into a blast chamber, and the blast chamber from there makes the obsidian, which is perfect, which means I have unlimited obsidian. It does take a little while, but it'll work out just fine. I wanted to make sure I had a good enough bow and a good enough sword to take on these new monsters, so I began the enchanting process. I think I enchanted about 30 bows and about 30 swords before I actually got the enchants I wanted, but I was ready now to face whatever fate had in store for me. I then decided it would be a great idea to name my sword Willy and my bow Billy, because that makes total sense. How awkward is it if you're a fire-breathing dragon and you get slain by something called Billy? The final preparation step was to go and collect some nether wart so I could make some fire-resistant potions. However, on my way I found a bastion, and I decided to loot it while I was going. I only found one netherite scrap in it, but that would do for now. After what seemed like forever, I found this temple-like object, and I figured, hey, maybe it has some chests inside. So I went in and inspected it, and turns out it had a few nether wart, just enough for what I needed, and I was able to head back home. I then crafted my fire-resistance potions, and slept for the night. I spent the next few days looking for some dragon spawns. You see, for some reason, they turned down the spawn rate for dragons inside of this modpack. It's like they want it to be too easy or something. So I may have exited the game and turned up the spawn rate, as, what am I, a peasant? I need to be at least on 10,000% spawning. Whilst looking for one, I found this really cool dungeon, but I couldn't enter it. Apparently you needed a key, and to get this key, you needed it from some strange traveler that resided around the dungeon. But I looked around and I couldn't find anybody, so I gave up and continued my quest for the dragons. And then, after I turned up the spawn rates a little bit more, I found my first dragon. I drew Billy, and I began to fire like no man had fired before, and I took down my first dragon. But this was just the first. I needed many more. After slaying 2 more dragons, I had enough scales to craft the blocks I would need to make the forge to craft the dragon steel ingots. So I returned home, ready to make the most menacing armor in the mod pack. I began the next day by smelting down some ancient debris. My void ore miner had been collecting it very passively, and it was just enough to make 2 articles of armor. While that was smelting down, I went out to collect some plants. This would be essential for the new dimension we were about to enter. I then crafted a pair of netherite leggings and boots. This is the first netherite armor I've ever made inside of Minecraft. I then began the enchanting process. I was going to enchant a bunch of osmium leggings, and then take the enchants off and apply them to my netherite. I used a disenchanter to remove all the good enchants off the osmium leggings. This way they would transfer into books, and I could apply them to my netherite armor. I then crafted the special obsidian that was required to make the portal to the abyss. A deep, cavernous underground area that had death lurking around every corner. I then began the construction of the portal, and I lit it, only to find out that it spreads all this disgusting dirt all over my base. So I quickly destroyed the portal and took care of the dirt. I needed a solution to this. I decided with my large cranium that I should build it on top of the nether portal. Nothing looks aesthetically horrible. Anyway, I plunged right in, and oh boy. I thought the Undergarden was sketchy. This place I would never want to go to again. And then I began the hunt. There are 3 bosses inside of this dimension. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to kill the top one. I really should have saved this for day 99 because, well, the series might end. But I plunged through and I went on my search to find these bosses. I spent the next day just exploring the realm, interacting with awful mobs that I never wanted to see again. I didn't actually know what I was doing, as there was no real wiki on how to play this mod, and it was pretty new and undiscovered. I had to somehow find a way to spawn the top bosses in, and to fight the mini-bosses. But I had no idea how to find them, and honestly I had no idea how to even fight them. But that would not stop me. I figured I would figure it out as I go. That's an intelligent observation. After doing some research, I discovered there were something called monoliths. Monoliths are just objects that spawn all around the world, but they're very rare. But when you right-click on them, they give you an ancient piece of paper. With that piece of paper, you can construct the final tome that spawns the final boss into the game. But these were quite rare, and it took me a few days to actually track all of them down. They don't spawn in any consecutive way. There's no way to really find them except for at randomness. So all I had was luck on my side to try and find these things. To spawn the final boss, you need to kill his minion, the Roca. And by minion, I basically mean boss as well, because this thing is an absolute tank, and he hits like a truck. In fact, the only reason I think I survived this was because I went into the mud, and he was too slow to catch up to me, and because I had reach on my sword, or my chest plate, I was able to hit him from a distance. I was able to slay him, and he drops the Horn of Roca, which is the last element I needed for the crafting of the boss. I then realized I needed 2 more monoliths to be able to spawn him in, so I spent the next day searching for the last 2. After I'd found all the components, I returned home. I knew if the Roca was that strong, the boss must be even stronger, and I needed some better stuff. So I crafted a diamond and emerald apple. This would give me some extreme buffs and at least a fighting chance against the ultimate boss of this dimension. And then I plunged back in, and I spawned in the boss. Roll the time lapse. Upon spawning the boss in, I began attacking the nearest entity. It turns out that was not the boss, but actually a friend who was trying to help me. My bad. I then received a staff after I spawned him in, and I right-clicked the staff because I had no idea what it did. It turns out it made 2 of them, and now I had to try and fight 2. This was going to be crazy. After slaying him, I right-clicked the monolith that he dropped, and I went into the abyss. I actually had no idea how to get out of here. I hadn't done any research, and I was currently stuck in what seemed like a void realm. But then these random jellyfish spawned around me, and I figured, hey, maybe I can kill one. And I tried to kill it, and it spawned me back into the overworld. Ah, that makes sense. When I got back, I spent the next day mining for obsidian. I knew if I wanted to expand my void ore miners and become fully independent on resources, I needed to increase the resource production. I began the next day with crafting all the components I would need for the new void ore miners. I wanted to make 3 of them. Thankfully, I had enough supplies thanks to the first void ore miner. If I had 3, I could start collecting every single element I would need to expand them over and over and over again until they eventually pay for themselves, and then I'm at a point of unlimited resources. I spent the next day troubleshooting and building my new void ore miners. I had 3 of them, 1 for resources, 1 for crystals, and 1 for botanic. Botanic is just anything that spawns blockwise in the world. This way I would have unlimited blocks for building, I would have unlimited resources, and I would have unlimited crystals so I could get to the next stage. To build the next stage of tier miner, you need to get chironite shards, but to get them, you need something that can mine crystal. Since I had a void ore miner now mining crystals, I was able to start collecting them to get to tier 2, which is much faster than tier 1. I started out the next day in the end. I wanted to collect some more ender pearls so I could make ender chests for my new void ore miners. I wanted to run all of my resources through ender chests so I'd never have to run pipes or anything wired anywhere. The next day, I put the ender chests onto the void ore miners and they began collecting. I made sure to double check that everything was working by putting a chest on them first, and then putting the ender chest on there once I confirmed that resources were running through. I then tried to decide what I wanted to do next. I think I wanted to fight the Wither, as that was the end game for what this was going to bring. The next day, I plunged into the Nether, and I built my first Wither. I'd gotten the skeletons when I was looking for Blaze a little while ago. I'd only had to kill like 5 and it dropped 3 heads. I don't know if the rates are turned up or if it's just my luck, but it was absolutely pog. I then began the battle with the first Wither. I had strong enough armor that he really didn't do much to me, and I was able to take him down. But upon taking him down, I had 3 Wither skulls left and I was quite confused. Does he drop 3 Wither skulls every time he dies? So I respawned him in again to see if my theory was correct. Because if he dropped 3 every time he died, we would have unlimited nether stars and we could make a farm out of it. But unfortunately, he did not drop it the second time. I'm not quite sure what happened the first time. I wanted to finish off the 100 days by venturing into that ice and fire dungeon we had seen earlier. But while on my way, I found this mansion in the middle of the forest. But it was no ordinary mansion. I thought this thing could only spawn in dark oak biomes, but I decided to investigate to see if it was, in fact, a normal vanilla mansion. It turns out there were some Vindicators inside, and it seemed to be what looked like a normal mansion. I was able to grab some totems with Willy, and then I made my way off to find the Ice and Fire dungeon. After doing some research, I found out that to get into the dungeon, you have to kill a lich, and he has to drop a key. So I waited around the dungeon until one finally spawned, and I bowed him out of existence. But he didn't drop any keys, and I was quite confused. After doing some more research, I discovered that the key was an extremely rare drop, so I thought it best if I killed him with my sword with looting 3. But I was running out of time, and on day 100, one more spawned in and I attacked him. I went in with my sword, crossing my fingers I would get a key, but unfortunately, I did not. I waited around the entire rest of the day, but I suppose this will have to wait for 200 days. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. My best friend is making 100 days videos as well. He survived 100 days in the Industrial Revolution, but put a twist on it to make it different than everyone else's video. You should check it out. The video is on your screen right now.